Good morning. Thanks for coming. Welcome to our FEI Chicago Career Management Group Breakfast, better known as the CMG Group, or the CMG Breakfast. Welcome, thanks for coming, and thanks for finding your way here. I kind of was going all over the place here. Eventually I found the cone, so good to see you guys here. I'm Jerry Novotny, and I'm a member of the CMG committee. For the first-time members, or first-time people that have been here before, or haven't been here before, I should say, we provide a number of different services, such as obviously this monthly breakfast meeting, which is on the first Thursday of the month, and I think it's like 10 months out of the year, 9-10 months out of the year. We also provide networking opportunities. We have a LinkedIn CMG group, LinkedIn group, so we share leads there and kind of collaborate, let's say. We also we have a lead sharing distribution list that we, again, purpose is to distribute leads throughout the group and also facilitate networking, if you will. And then we also, by the way, we get 1 CPE credit, so anybody that's counting that, and I think at the end of September, the Illinois CPA Society, or the Illinois Society says that's a 3-year reporting period. So I'd like to recognize also the members, actually, who make this possible. First of all, our leader, Vince Dorado, he's the chair of the CMG committee. Everybody knows Vince, right? Next, Patty Bogash. Bob Lynn is here. Mike Conti, John Leacani is here, obviously. Steve Kalisher, Nick Pessimist, myself, and let's see, Kirby Razi. So let's give everybody a round of applause. Also, I want to recognize we have 2 valued sponsors of the CMG group. One is the Overture Group, represented today by John Leacani. Would you like to say a word or two, please?
Sure, Jerry. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm John Leacani. I'm managing director with the Overture Group. We're an executive and professional search firm. And we focus a lot on working with a lot of privately held mid-sized businesses here in the Midwest. We do a lot of controller and CFO search. I know a number of you in the room. Overture Group is here. We're here to help you. Please feel free to reach out to myself or my colleague Mike Conti is not here. He's in warmer weather, I think, golfing right now down somewhere in the southern U.S. So he sucks. Here. But no, whatever we can do to help you, please feel free to reach out to us. And we've been a sponsor of the CMG now for a number of years. I'm not even sure how long it goes back. It goes back so long I stopped counting, but please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.
All right. John, does that mean he got into the vacation calendar before you did?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay. Yeah. The other group would be the Mentor Group. I didn't see anybody from there, but they also have been a long-time sponsor of us. Over the past year, we've also developed a success notification program, and there's a form out here that as you land, if you're in transition, we really would love to know that you have landed. Helps everybody celebrate your landings and also just kind of know how to keep in touch with you as well. Now, he didn't fill out a landing notice, but Marty Ross just landed. He just started on Monday, and he's with a CFO of a holding company that he said is they're a distributor of parts for appliances, HVAC, outdoor power equipment, and that's why he's not here today. So he says hello. So Marty, good luck. Come on back next one. Also, Patty has volunteered to spearhead a committee for us for the development of a distribution list, as I referred to earlier, about in-transition members sharing leads and staying engaged. So Patty, if you'd like to say a few words about that.
I was going to stay in here, but I didn't realize how many people are actually starting to go here. So, hi, good morning, everyone. For those of you that I didn't get to chat with already, I wanted to let you know that with the business cards that you leave, I'd love to add you to the distribution list for the leads that the group has. And let me explain what we're talking about a little bit further when we talk about leads. So this group obviously talks with a lot of other people, you know, the network of the network gets out there. And if there are any roles that you are not considering or that you would not be necessarily interested in pursuing and would like to share them with your peers, they can share them with their network. We have really focused in on trying to distribute those. So it's just the group helping each other out. It's not positions that my firm is working on, or, you know, they may even come from other firms and they get distributed out there. Obviously, the more people you talk to, the more people you meet, the more opportunities come about. So we'd really like to be able to get that information out to the group, whether it's a fit for you or someone you know, you can continue to share it. And my goal is to share them weekly, but if I don't get a lot of leads, then I'm not going to bother everybody with, you know, the empty emails. So I was planning on sharing them every Friday. So please send them to me. Thank you to those who have sent me leads. I really appreciate it. And I'll continue to send those out. And you know, if you were not at the last meeting, but you're at this one, you'll be added then to the list, and we'll just keep adding to that list so you guys can keep networking, and hopefully it's a good way to keep in contact as well. So, yes.
So if somebody's on LinkedIn, they see, they go to jobs, and they see a CFO or controller job, let's not represent, they should somehow cut and paste that and put it, send it out to the group, just because not everybody's eyes might have seen that.
Absolutely, I think that's a really good example. So yes, whether you see, because not everybody has time to go to LinkedIn every day and or you know, Indeed every day and look at those. If you see something out there, send it over. That's a great way. If you get an email from a company or a recruiter, and again, you know, they're either looking to network with you or they wanted to speak with you about the role, but you know, you don't want to pursue it necessarily. Those are all different types of leads that we can share with the group that hopefully can help everybody land a little faster and help their network as well. So great question. Any other questions? Anything else I can clarify? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
You're welcome.
And thanks, Patty, because I believe that was your idea. Patty's a new member of the committee, and she came up with that idea. It's great. You know, we wouldn't, none of us would be here if it wasn't for the membership committee. We do have one, at least one representative here. Dan McHugh? Dan? So anybody that hasn't joined or wants to rejoin, please see Dan afterwards. I had mentioned before about that monthly meeting. I'm not going to go into all the details, but the key thing is if you're not a member, you want to attend, you need to kind of clear that through Susan Gidley and register through her. For the next few months, we're looking forward to 3 more events. Our fiscal year ends June 30th, so on April 2nd, again, the first Thursday of the month, we've got a person talking about DISC analysis. DISC is dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. I'll start with that. Then on May 7th, I was talking to somebody today about mastermind. So master your mindset and load yourself and your team. Lead yourself, I'm sorry. And then the final one, on June 4th, is a presentation by the mentor group to be determined. So again, please leave your business cards out here on the table. We will collect those. Vince will scan those and we'll send them out as a PDF file. That way you don't have to go and grab a card from everybody here. Sign-in sheets are important. Please fill those out. We also have a survey. We've been doing this a couple of times now, and what we really encourage you to do, fill it out, and if you'd like to win a gift card, a small gift card, a coffee card or something, please put your name and phone number and how we can get that to you. We're really looking forward to, you know, comments, future events, what you thought about the events today, that type of thing, additional speakers as well. So that's kind of the housekeeping, and I got to start moving here because I don't want to take up too much of Rick's time here. But Rick Lochner is the president of RPC Leadership Associates. He's going to talk about the topic that's called, is the company you want to work for really the company you want to work for? Now, he's given me a bio that really takes a long time to get through, so I think all I'm going to do is say we were lucky to have Rick speak here. Rick, you said, what, about 6 years ago?
February 2009.
Wow.
So every 6 years you're coming back in February.
Yeah.
But But let's just say that Rick kind of combines a number of different venues. He was a graduate of the West Point Military Academy. He's been in the Army. He's been in public companies, Fortune 1000 companies. He has his own business now that was started, I believe, in 2008. So it's a coaching, and I'm not going to go into more detail because I won't give the right aspect of it. But he also does a number of things for volunteer organizations. I first met you, I think you said 10 years ago, in a boutique networking group. So without further ado, I think we're in for a treat. So Rick, take over.
Thank you.
It is a pleasure to be back. I always love saying that. Pleasure to be back. You know, when you're a public speaker, you know, it's easy to get one gig, but when they call you back, then that's kind of validation that you've done good. So it is, even though it took 6 years. That's okay. I'll take it. So, but it is nice to be back. It's, you know, Don remembered me and said, okay, haven't you spoken here before? So it's good that you leave a lasting impact on at least one person in a room full of 80 people. Yeah, so, but the topic is really born out of a lot of my own history, a lot of my own experiences as an executive in transition. I was born and raised in the telecom industry. As Jerry said, I graduated from the Military Academy at West Point, so the Army was my initial career of choice. I grew up in the Army. I mean, literally, you know, that's really all I ever wanted to do. But, you know, reality is what it is. And in 1989, anybody know what happened that was of historical significance? What's that?
Desert Shield.
I'm sorry?
Desert Shield.
No, it was 1990. The year before that, what happened? The Berlin Wall came down. The Cold War ended. Peace broke out throughout the world for a couple of days. So, you know, that unfortunately that was the beginning of a massive drawdown, only delayed by Desert Storm. You know, so myself and 300,000 of my closest friends were, you know, our services were no longer needed. So I joined, you know, I was in telecom in the military, and I decided that was obviously what I wanted to stay in. So I joined a small company, a small growing company that you might have heard of called Sprint, as a project manager. And you know, when you start to see things that matter. And so I started off as a program manager. 8.5 years later, I'm running the Central United States for Sprint Business, about $1.5 billion business unit. 600 people scattered over 19 states. So you do that because you step to the front and you lead, and you know, the kinds of things that we learn in the military, the kinds of things that we learn about leadership really matter in the business world. And so, but in 2003, Sprint said, you know, we want to move all of our executives to Kansas City. And anybody here from Kansas City? I always like to check before I say, you know, nothing against Kansas City, but I kind of like Chicago better. So we can argue about barbecue, you know, but Chicago is where it's at. So we parted ways. And I decided, as most executives do in transition, and I'm sure all of you have had that conversation with yourself, so what do I really want to do when I grow up? Right? Do you have that conversation with yourself? Forget your chronological age. It doesn't really matter. So I decided that after spending, at that point, 24 years in large organizations, I wanted to go hang out and work in the entrepreneurial space. And so, as you know, those of you in finance know that when you know, after a startup burns through the venture capital, they go for that second round of funding, you know, the investment bank is going to want a little guarantee that you've got the operational fortitude to be able to grow the business to where, you know, you say you're going to. And in this particular case, a company in Naperville, about 7 years old, had successfully gotten that next round of funding, but the bank obviously looked around the boardroom or the leadership team and said, yeah, you don't have anybody who's got the chops to you know, grow this and scale this company up. So bottom line, they hired me, and so we went from a less than $30 million company to a $140 million company in 2 years. And then it was sold. So quite an interesting experience, going through the whole merger process. And then when it was sold, I said, okay, I found myself now asking that question again. What do I really, really want to do when I grow up? And at that point, I decided I wanted to forego the 26 years of telecommunications experience. I want to get into healthcare. What do you think happened? What do you think I heard a lot of when I said, I'm foregoing all this experience in one industry and I'm going to go play in another industry?
You don't have the background.
Yeah, you don't have the background, you're crazy. By the way, that was what my wife said. You're crazy, you can't do that. Well, 8 months later, I'm running all the non-clinical operations for a disease management company based out of Atlanta, Georgia. They just purchased a company in Roseline, here in Roseline. So I'm familiar with this territory, by the way, the River in Bryn Mawr. I've worked there for a total of 9 years, so I'm very familiar with the commute. I realized this morning why I really don't like commuting. So even though it's improved, but nonetheless. So I think it's attitude, and I think that's one of the things that if there's a message to all of this that I want to talk about, the underneath all of that is attitude, is the approach that you go at the job search or anything for that matter. Well, so I'm working for this healthcare company for a couple of years, and then it was sold. So you start to see this trend. Rick starts with the company, 2 years later, the company gets sold. So it was at that point that I said, by the way, at that point was July of 2008. And you all know exactly what was going on in July of 2008. Timing is awesome. So we said, okay, we're going to go all in on a service company, service business, in the middle of the worst recession since the Great Depression. Why not? But again, it's attitude. So what I'm going to share with you is a combination of a business model that I've created through my corporate career, but then leveraged in a way that I've successfully leveraged it in several of my career transitions to give you some ideas on how to approach, both from a skill and from a mindset, how to approach the job search, especially at the executive level. Fair enough? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, can you see that? So many job hunters think the primary role is to get the job interview, when in reality it's to get an offer for a job that's a good fit for both parties, right? How many times, I as an interviewer, I could, within 5 minutes you can tell they just want a job. They're not looking for something that's a good fit. They just want money, right? And fundamentally there's nothing wrong with that. But in the executive job search, one of the things that frustrated me was going to networking groups that really didn't cater to the executive search. Executives aren't going to, out in the suburb, name your networking group, they're not going to find leads that way. They're going to find leads by, if you want to work for a CEO of a $200, $300 million company, you're going to have to do it a different way. You're going to have to sell yourself. You're going to have to direct market yourself to the target market. So one of the things I did, and I'm sure you're all familiar with Robert Half Finance, right, in some form or fashion. But I used to go, I'm not a finance executive, but I used to go to those events because CFOs were part of my target audience. And just to kind of learn that language. When I switched from Sprint to the entrepreneurial business, it was, I hung out for a year with entrepreneurs. I went to bootstrapping sessions downtown Chicago just to learn the language. Entrepreneurs speak a way different language than Sprint or any large organization. They just do. And if you don't know that language, then good luck trying to get into their world. So part of this process is to, how do you do that? How do we structure the search so that we're going to have a good fit? So a couple of assumptions. A, do you believe that statement I had on the previous slide? Everybody agree? Get an amen? Amen. Amen. Okay, good. You're targeting a specific company or interviewing for a specific company, and you want to show value to that targeted company beyond your resume or whatever it says in your LinkedIn profile. That be fair? Because that's really what they're looking for. Let's face it, anybody, there's software that does a lot of skills that happen in the finance world, right? And if there's people that need to do it, there's outsourcing opportunities that can do it cheaper. So one of the challenges I've always challenge myself with and I challenge my clients with as a leadership and business coach is, what is your value, right? What is your value? And if your value is, I can make debits equal credits, good luck, because that's not value. Something I used to tell my engineers, and I'm a self-taught programmer. In the military, any veterans here? Besides Jerry? Well, in the military, you don't get a choice of, hey, we'd like you to interview for this post, right? You get a piece of paper in the mail, you open up the envelope and it says, be here in 60 days. Have a nice life. Now, that's pretty much it. I had 7 jobs, 11 years in the Army, didn't interview for a single one of them. I just got something in the mail, said, be here in 60 days, be here in 90 days. Didn't matter that I had to be in Germany in April, and I had kids in school. You know what the Army's response was? Figure it out. So, never had the opportunity to interview, so it was always about, figure it out. So, you always have to have value beyond what it says on paper. So my engineers would at one point, they thought their A game, now these are engineers making 6 figures, they thought their A game was creating Visio diagrams of the networks that they designed, and that they just handed over to a salesperson and said, go sell this. And I said, that's not going to work. I'm paying you 6 figures to draw network diagrams. That ain't going to work. So I said, look, if I can write code to replace what you think is your A game, guess what? I don't need you anymore. So that was kind of motivation. So it's always about value, right? And this process has worked well for me in being able to go into an interview or go into a job search, providing value beyond just showing up and repeating what's on my resume. This conversation is built around a model, a business alignment maturity model, a model that I created about 20 years ago to provide the structure of building an aligned company, business alignment. I'm a systems thinker. When I sit in a crowded room, my mind is always looking, well, we could probably improve that process. Well, this process is disconnected. That's just the way my mind works. So I created this about 20 years ago. And I found that as I got into the career transition, my own career transitions, I found myself using this model turned a little bit differently. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, because if you believe that the interview process is all about I'm interviewing you just like you're interviewing me, then I want to know some stuff about you. But the challenge is, how do you structure that? How do you structure that conversation? How do you structure your research? So, have you ever tried to build anybody here build puzzles or have built puzzles in the past? I'm not talking about the 30-piece, for $5. I'm talking about the 500-piece, that sort of thing. Would you ever consider doing that with the pieces face down? Would you ever consider building that puzzle without once looking at the picture on the box? Would you do it? If you're slightly twisted, you might try it, but why would you? But yet we go into the job search, we're looking for companies without looking at the cover on the box. We have no idea what the picture on the box looks like, but we're trying to build a puzzle. Do you agree? Because that's what we're doing. Anytime you research a company, if you were to research RPC Leadership Associates, and you have no structure for how to do that, you're just spraying and praying. Right? You're just kind of looking for nuggets here, nuggets there, but there's no way to organize it. So I used a way to organize, basically take that same model and organize it in a way that I could say, look, here's how I'm going to structure my research on ABC company, whatever that may be. So as you can see here, and we'll walk through each one of these, it starts with a vision and ends with results, direct results. Now I use this same model when I'm coaching salespeople. I'm using the model when I'm coaching business owners, because it's all about the picture on the puzzle box. What's it look like? I've heard of, anybody ever read the book Traction? Anybody heard of it? It's, another way to look at this is the operating system for a business. Right? It's the underlying, whether you're a Mac user or a Windows user, you don't see the operating system, right? It just works underneath all the stuff that you're doing. So this is the structure. This is the picture on the box for how to structure your research. Okay, ready? So the first thing is, does that company have a vision? And a lot of them don't, by the way. A lot of them don't have visions of what they want to be when they grow up, or what they aspire to be as an organization. So and as I show each layer, what I'd like you to do is ask yourself, what questions should I ask? Or where should I go? Where could I go to find this information? Right? So you're looking at a vision, which is typically, what they want to be on the 5-year horizon. It's the long pole. It doesn't the long play. It doesn't really, it's not measurable. It's just, what they aspire to be. So, and it has, without a vision, quite frankly, the vision is really the secret weapon to break through the status quo. So if they don't have a vision, my first concern of a company that doesn't have a vision is, are they stuck? Right? Are they stuck somewhere? They may or may not be, but more often than not, in my experience now 7 years as a coach, is they typically are. Companies that don't have visions or something like it typically get stuck. So what questions would you ask? Or where would you go find the vision statement for a company that you want to work for? Anybody?
Their website.
Their website? And if it's not on the website?
Annual report.
Annual report if they're public, if they're private.
Please, employee manual.
All right, if you have access to that. All right. Everybody here in LinkedIn? Shake your head, yes. Okay. If you're in LinkedIn, right, find an employee or two, right? They'll tell you, well, we don't have one of those. Or, we have one, so how do you use it? How does it, used every day? Because that's a key question, because if they have it hanging on the wall, and you talk to a couple of employees and they say, well, it's just stuff on the wall, then it's really nothing more than corporate poetry, is what I call it. You know what I'm talking about, all the nice posters hanging on the wall that everybody ignores. It's corporate poetry, that's all it is. It's nice to read, but quite frankly, it's BS, because nobody's living it, especially the senior leaders. So if they're not, and employed, mid-level management employees are typically good sources for questioning whether that is. So why is that information valuable? Why is that information valuable? You go into an interview and you say, oh yeah, we have a vision. So what do you ask to kind of say, well, how is that vision lived? Got to ask it, right? If you want to show value, what do you think?
Well, as you're doing your research in a library, sometimes they have these databases that are wonderful and they're free, but if you've done your homework, then you can say, well, I understand, or I've seen, or I've read.
Yeah.
How is that working? Or have you thought of, or however you want to frame it.
Okay.
So if you
Yeah.
just step in.
Put it into some sort of context. Ask them a question to put that vision into some sort of context. Hey, can you tell me a story about how that's lived here at ABC Company? What does that look like, right? Create a visual. Because let's face it, we speak in words, but we think in pictures, right? And if you want to successfully have a conversation about what's going on, then the words that they say, what picture is that forming? So, it's really one of the 21st century communication skills for leaders especially is the ability to tell a story. I would argue that anybody in career transition, that is a necessary skill set. Because you have to put whatever it is on your resume or whatever it is on your LinkedIn profile into some sort of context. Because there's nothing harder than saying, hey, I do all this cool stuff. And the question back to you is, so what? Right? You got to be able to answer the so what. All right. Next level is in the business alignment model is the mission statement. Now here's where it gets very granular. The vision statement is very aspirational. it's like a purpose statement, if you will, for if you're an individual. But the mission statement now starts to say, here's who, how, what, we're going to get very granular. The vision statement for my company, RPC Leadership Associates, is making leadership a way of life. That's my vision statement. But that's, again, that's very aspirational, that's very, it's you know, so what do you do with that? So my mission statement then is helping organizational leaders, both for-profit, nonprofit, working with individual professionals, and working with students to enhance their leadership skills. I just graduated a class 2 Fridays ago of sophomores and juniors in District 203 in Naperville through a leadership institute. So I work with, you know, across the spectrum. So, but that's my mission statement. That's who, that's what, that's how, that I help people make leadership a way of life. So again, the question that you can ask is, you're starting to formulate an idea of whether this company that you want to work for has a vision, has a mission, but lives the vision, lives the mission, right? Because it gives you that opportunity to start kind of piecing the puzzle, right? Formulating the puzzle as you're asking the questions or doing your research. Some of this stuff you can find just offline. Questions so far? Too fast, too slow? Just right. Okay. All right. Strategy. This is probably one of the most crucial questions or crucial areas for any business that you want to work for. Simply stated, you know, and there's volumes of books that have been written on strategy. Simply stated, a strategy is how you're going to compete. End of story. That's it. That's all a strategy is. How are you going to compete? Now, there's a lot that goes into that, but how you're going to take that vision and mission and turn that into a competitive strategy. So, you know, naturally, I've been with companies where the strategy is to grow, right? As a matter of fact, a lot of my clients hire me to help them execute that strategy. But I've also worked with organizations where the strategy was to invest, make capital investments, and so obviously when you make those major capital investments, you have to modify your strategy a little bit on what the profit margins are ultimately going to be. So you have to adjust. I remember being I just stepped down last October after 6 years as the president of the board of Literacy DuPage. And in 2008, we had our best year ever in the 40-year history, or the 38-year history at that point. The next year, our strategy was to bring less. Why? Because we realized that, you know, the natural tendency is, hey, we hit X, now let's go X plus Y, right? That's kind of the natural tendency. But if you really understand your industry, you know, and in the nonprofit space, we knew that we had about a 6 to 9 month lag effect on the recession. So that we knew darn well that we weren't going to be able to hit that. The high number in 08 was really a carryover from 07. But now that the recession was in full swing in 08, in 09, we actually downgraded our expectations. So it's all about how are you going to compete realistically. And you ask them, how do you compete? Do you compete on price? Do you compete on quality? Tell me some stories about how you compete in the marketplace, because that's going to give you a lot of information. Bottom line, strategy is how you're going to compete. Now these are all questions, we've only talked about the high level. These are all questions that, in my experience, even executives don't ask. They just don't ask this depth of questioning about what you do, how you do it, why you do it, etc. But it's, when you ask these questions, these are the kinds of things that separate, if you'll excuse me ladies, the men from the boys, right? That's how it works. One of my first favorite questions, anytime I was interviewing, was tell me about your culture. And there is so much, I've gotten every answer from, oh yeah, we're a can-do culture, this is what we do, this is how we do it, to, they have no idea. They have no idea how to answer that question. So that tells you stuff. That tells you what you're getting into. And you may still work for them. You may still accept their offer if they make it. But at least you're going into it eyes wide open. At least you see the opportunity. All right, so what I've covered with the first 3 layers is the strategic piece of it. Now, what I find is that there's 2 types of companies in the world. There's that need my help. Some don't need my help, but there's those that have an awesome strategy, no clue how to execute, no idea. And then there's companies who have a lot of tactical goodness going on, have no direction, right? See, one's almost the polar opposite of the other. What I'm going to talk about in the next 2 layers of the business alignment model is how you can dig in the interview or in your research, dig into what I consider the key elements of the glue that binds those two things together, the strategic and the tactical. So the first is structure. Structure really is broken out into 3 pieces. It's people, process, and technology. So you can kind of break it down into, so how do you evaluate performance, right? So are people both capable and compatible? Right? We were talking about this earlier about some examples of attitude. Because ultimately at the end of the day, that's what I do. I'm in the attitude adjustment business. So when you look at, and attitude is 75% of the math when it comes to success. People get kind of hung up on this, I can do this or I can do that. So what? That's 25% of the math. And I, by the way, I put my money where my mouth is. In my last corporate job, I fired my best inside sales agent for having a bad attitude. Top numbers, month over month over month over month over month. But I let them go because the attitude did not fit the culture. And then, of course, told everybody, this is why this person left. So, never had a problem with attitude after that. So, how do you know that people are capable and compatible? That they have the attitude, the culture, and that's where the culture question really has some meat to it, because you get a sense of, and here's where talking to people that you can connect to in LinkedIn that work for this company, you can really get a sense of, does attitude even matter? Because we've all met the salesperson who hits those numbers, but is a total jerk in the office. Treats the people who have to implement that sale like crap, just is obnoxious to work with, but hits those numbers month over month over month. So you want to find out. My kids ask. My middle son works for the Hyatt Regency at the McCormick Center, and he actually came up with what I thought was a great question. He said, "What's it like to work here?" And I thought that was a great question to ask in the interview, regardless of your age, to what's it like to work here, and see what kind of answer they give, because that'll give you some insight into the people idea. Processes. Every business has 5 core processes. Inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, and customer service. Those are the 5 core processes. Why? Because those are the things that drive revenue, right? Those are the things that, IT, HR, finance, nothing personal, but you support those other 5. And that's the way it, because the first 5 drive revenue. So ask questions about, one of my favorite questions is, how long does it take you to know yesterday's sales numbers? That gives me process intel that is invaluable. That way you can tell maybe they have a systems issue, maybe they have a process issue. But how quickly can you find out what yesterday's sales numbers are? It's a great question to ask. If they say, well, I just go to this dashboard and I hit a button and boom, there it is. Or if they say, well, we got to import it from this system and then we export it to Excel and then we sort and index and all that jazz, and then I get a report 5 days later, what's that tell you? To me, that's called opportunity, especially if you're in, because I know finance and IT live together very closely these days. All right, so the last bullet is people first, process second, technology third. You ever worked for an organization that it was exactly reverse? Ask anybody that's bought an ERP system or a CRM system or any alphabet system, PeopleSoft, Oracle, Bond, name your system. They buy the system, then they rejigger the processes to work with that system, and then whatever bodies are left are there to make sure the system does what it's supposed to do. Not sustainable. It just isn't sustainable. People first, process second, technology to support the first two, third. And that's the kind of questioning and that's the kind of ideas you can bring to the table to add value to what you bring. All right. Compensation. This might seem like a strange thing to bring to the conversation, but you're really not asking about what is my compensation. Although I will tell you, it was a very awkward conversation in my last corporate job when before signing the contract to work for them, I asked about the exit strategy. And that's a weird conversation to have. Well, what happens if you, because I worked for a couple of, I've been on the wrong or right side of a couple of mergers. It made sense to me, but it was a little awkward nonetheless. What's what's in it for me if you sell the company? And I haven't even started working there yet. But it was a good conversation. The VP of HR appreciated the idea. What you want to know is the structure of the compensation. How do you reward high performers? Right, that's a question. How do you reward high performers? Right. What other questions might come into play here?
How do you identify a high performer in all the areas, including us non-core people?
Yeah. Yeah. See, Jerry's known me for 10 years. He picked right up on that.
We're subjected to that every day, right?
Yeah. Well, that is the reality, I mean, that's, in the telecom business, it's you kind of felt that pain, right? Because, nobody cares about communications until it doesn't work, right? So, there was another question back here.
But I would say, look at how your salespeople compensate, or tell me about your management bonus program.
Okay.
They're going to say, what kind of behaviors are you driving people towards?
Exactly, and you can even take it one step further and say, how does that behavior align with, the strategy? Because that's, once you start getting into these conversations, you always want to tie it back to the strategy, all right? I'm big on context. We live in an information-rich, knowledge-poor world, right? When you look at and by that I mean, you look at the amount of information we have access to. 20 years ago, the amount of information doubled every 5 years. When you look at what that number is today, what do you think it is? The amount of information we have access to doubles every
18 months.
18 months, okay?
Few days.
9 minutes. 9 minutes. So Facebook, in 2015, Facebook will become the largest country in the world. Last year it was third behind China and India. So when you think about the sheer massive amount of information, what becomes, because you guys know all about all the information you have, but you also know that even as a CFO, it's not just about what's in the income statement, the balance sheet, cash flow statement, any of that sort of thing. It's how did we generate those numbers, right? Your value to the business is how are those numbers generated operationally, right? But is that still the case? I just want to make sure everybody's still awake. I see open eyes, I'm just making sure. But is that not the case? Where if you want to separate yourself from any other CFO that wants the same job, you got to tap into the business. Same is true for a CIO. Same is true for an HRO. You got to be able to put that in the context of the business, or you're just doing like everybody else. All right. So this is a good question. Last bullet. How do you feed your eagles? There are companies still out there, and I'm sure you've worked with them or know of them, where the merit increase, same across the board. Whether you're the worst slug in the world that still happens to work for the company, or you're the top of you're the best eagle they got. Everybody gets 3%. Dumbest thing in the world, in my opinion. So, how do you feed your eagles? All right, so now we have goals. And see, here's why I believe the challenge with going from strategy, going from that strategic, here's where we're going to go, and they struggle with execution because they go straight from strategy to goals. They don't consider, do we have the right people? Do our processes still work? Do we have the right supporting technology? They don't ask any of those questions. Now you can ask those questions based on what we just talked about, right? Now you have the wherewithal to ask the questions, because when it gets to goals, you know, how are these goals aligned with your strategy? I remember the first, my largest client is a global manufacturing company. I remember the first time I spent time with some of their mid-level managers, and I armed them with, you know, a goal planning process, or, you know, a thought process that challenged why this goal versus that goal. And at that point, the senior management team had not yet participated in the leadership development process. But when I turned these 12 managers loose on the senior leadership team, and they started asking those kinds of questions, I remember the COO called me and said, I think we need to move up our schedule. We need to move the senior team up further in the process, because they couldn't answer the questions that the managers were now asking. Because now it was about, okay, I have this goal, how does this align? How does this align with our strategy? What is our real priorities? And by the way, in the 21st century, the time management skill that matters the most is not how you get all your to-dos done, it's how well you prioritize. That is the 21st century time management skill. If you can't prioritize, you're going to be lost. And it has nothing to do with technology or anything else. That's context. Prioritization means this goal is more important than that goal, and here's why. And being able to come to the table and say, here's how I prioritize, you know, or I can help you prioritize goals, not just based on financials, but based on all the other things that go into it. Make sense? Okay. I have till 9 o'clock? All right, cool. So one of the ways that we use is SWOT analysis. Everybody here familiar with the SWOT analysis? All right, so you know, it's just, I find it a very, very valuable tool to look at whether the goals are even doable, whether you have the right capabilities to execute those goals. Just because you get a goal from senior management, I hate to say it, but my experience tells me it doesn't necessarily mean they've thought it through. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. But at least it allows you to, or arms you with the ability to ask the questions about alignment. How does this, to me, that's the $6 million question when it comes to goals. How do these goals align with our strategy? Because if you can't tell a good story around that, what happens? If you don't understand a goal, Mark, you're executing a goal and you have no idea how it ties to the bigger picture, what's going to happen?
I'll be going in the wrong direction.
Exactly. You'll pat yourself on the back for accomplishing the goal, and the company is 2 steps further behind than it was when you started, right? That kind of stuff. All right. So it's a way to are we on the right track? Is this, and does it make sense to me? All right. Questions? What kind of questions would you then ask about goals? Because more often than not, companies are not going to tell you what they're not going to put their goals out on the website. They're not going to put their goals out in the public space. So it's kind of incumbent upon you to kind of flesh that out in the interview or some other way. What do you think?
I've asked things like, you know, what project is on the horizon, and how you know, how I can help you implement that project.
Okay.
By bringing certain resources.
In other words, you don't ask them how can I help. You
No,
tell them.
They identify what their project is that they're working on, and then I figure out how to package my skills to make that project happen.
Right. Okay. What else? Yes.
You use the term scorecard. I'm wondering if you could say, without giving me confidential information, can you walk me through the major categories of your scorecard that your company uses? If they don't have one, then man, you better start getting out of the...
Opportunity, right?
Well,
you get
okay,
2 choices. You can
sure.
run for the hills, run fast, or you can say to yourself, this is, opportunity. I mean, there's something to be said for, okay, boss, give me the worst performing team in the business, right, as an opportunity. If you feel confident enough about what you do, just give me the worst team, and we'll make it happen. I mean, it's kind of a gutsy move, but, So, again, that's attitude, right? Attitude is, do you see opportunity, or do you see danger? And it could be both. Just depends on what you're up for. But I'm glad you asked the question, Jerry, because the very next layer is scientific methods, which is typically a conversation that people forget to have. The layer before on goals is what we're going to do. This layer talks about how are we going to measure what we do. And the balanced scorecard, to your point, has these 4 categories. Everybody familiar with the balanced scorecard? Dave Norton and I forget the other guy's name. Kaplan. Was it Kaplan?
Kaplan.
Yeah. So obviously, everybody in this room is very familiar with the financial element of it, but the balanced scorecard is, by its nature, it's more than just the financials. It goes back to that context. What's behind the numbers? What are the customers saying? Let's face it, be perfectly honest. Spreadsheet engineering is alive and well. Right? You can make it look good, but if the customers are not satisfied, or at a minimum satisfied, if they're not loyal, then obviously the sustainability of those numbers might be called into question. So questions that you can ask, how do you measure? Great question. But then how do you know what your customers, how do you know how they feel about your services? Tell me a story. And it's always tell me a story, right? Don't just ask, are your customers happy with your services? Oh, sure. Right? I didn't tell you anything, right? It really doesn't. So what you want to hear is, give me an example, if you would, about, what the customers are saying. Because, I've done some research, but I'd like to hear what you say. And of course, I've done some research, so if I'm the interviewer, I said, oh, man, I better come up with my best story, because you've done some research. Right? So, this customer, operational processes. Every successful organization I've ever worked for never stops improving their processes. Never, ever, ever. It's an ongoing, we've all heard the term continuous improvement, but let's face it, in the busyness of running a business, growing a business, typically we get, okay, we fixed this one, now we're done, right? And they don't have a process that says to keep it evergreen. Because every 6 months, to my way of thinking, and I've done this as a corporate executive in multiple industries, every 6 months, we're evolving into something else. By design, every 6 months. I actually do it personally. Every 6 months, I change a habit. 3 years ago, I started writing left-handed. I'm a left-time righty. I started writing left-handed. I still do all my crossword puzzles and Sudokus left-handed. Right? It's just changing it up so that you continue to evolve. Because as soon as you stop, what happens organizationally? As soon as you stop, somebody else is ahead of you. Just the nature of it, nature of business today. Somebody else is ahead of you, right? Is that true in the search world? Even if you have a very close niche, is there somebody else there that does what you do?
Absolutely. You have to constantly be bringing value. And what value do you bring?
Exactly.
And that's what differentiates you. When you're in that prospect meeting, they're looking at what value are you going to bring. Yeah, you can bring in people, that's great, but what else are you going to bring in that process? I'm looking at you for guidance and support here, and I'm looking for value.
Yeah. It's all about value. So these questions that you're asking, it's about you're learning about them, but to the extent that those questions really hit home, they're making a judgment about you that says, man, this person is really digging deep. They must really know their stuff, or have that depth, not width, depth of what they can bring to the party. And then learning and growing. It's one thing to you know, produce great numbers and have processes, customers are happy, but eventually if you're not growing your internal resources like people, if you don't have a process or a program to do that, eventually that's going to catch up to you. I mean, let's face it, we've all read the Gallup survey. 71% of people quit their jobs every day. Then they get in their car and drive to work. Right? Disengaged. So how are you growing your people? What are those internal processes to help grow people? And what ideas do you bring to the table to do that? Skill, we were talking earlier at breakfast, attitude is 75% of the story. Skill and knowledge is 25%. Of that 25%, skill is less than 5%. So if you're banking on skill, I got a less than 5% ROI on you if that's your A game. The A game comes from the belief that you can and knowing when and where to use those skills at the appropriate time and place. That's success. All right. And results. One of the challenges any organization gets into is they confuse activity with results. Hey, look, we're doing lots of stuff, right? So what, right? And it's not just results. I probably should have changed that. I've come to realize that anybody can produce results. It's how do you produce the desired results, right? So that's really the differentiator in today's conversation, I believe, and based on what I see, is how are you producing desired results? Because quite frankly, anybody can produce a result. It's can you produce the desired results? So when I work with a business owner who has been in business for 7 years and they get to a number and then we start working together and we start focusing on the desired result, they double their business in 2 years. I have 2 clients in a very difficult industry called healthcare that have done that. So because they stop focusing on just results and focusing on what the desired result, because what does that do? How does that change your mindset? What do you think? Anybody? When you focus on the desired result.
It helps you achieve your A goals, right? Your A
Exactly.
priority goals.
Exactly. Right? And if they're out of bounds, then you refine those A goals, but you don't settle. Right? You just don't settle. Because once you start settling, you become a B player, and the value proposition drops significantly. Right? And everybody here wants to be an A player. The last bullet here is, well, actually, let me talk about 2. One of my favorite questions is, how do you, business, measure adaptability? Right? How do you measure adaptability? Anybody got any ideas? Hey, you guys are in the metrics business. How do you measure adaptability? What are some thoughts?
Percentage of products that are a year old or 2 years old.
Exactly. How much revenue are you getting from products that are less than 2 years old? Right? That's adaptability. Great. Any others? Anybody have experience with that metric? No? Okay. Great question to ask, though, isn't it? Yes?
I would ask you, a company, like a manufacturing company that's producing something, how much money are you investing in R&D?
Yeah, another great question.
Or, you know,
Well, percentage of revenue.
yeah, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah. Or another variation of that, which I actually used, was how much is coming from domestic versus international, right? You know, you look at that growth because you know a lot of old school manufacturers may have tapped out their domestic market, and what are they look? You know, how are they looking offshore? So, a couple of good ones. The last one is, yes, Jerry.
Another one might be, what was the trend line for off-spec or out-of-spec material if you're a manufacturer?
Okay.
If you're making material, you know, what does that trend look like?
Right.
Is it static? Is it going up?
Sure. Yeah, because, a great point. Because when you're measuring the first 2, which almost every company is, it means that you're measuring how well are we making green things and how cheaply are we making green things, but where are we looking to make sure that the customers are now asking for red things? Right? How, you know, what is that process in place to say, hey, we're doing an awesome job building stuff that nobody wants anymore. Hey, there's still companies out there doing that. You know, I mean, ask any telecom company that made a major investment in infrastructure, and then the digital world, you know, the data world just overwhelmed them. But they had all this capital investment, so they kind of, you know, anybody here work for Nortel once upon a time? Yeah, so, all right. Another question I ask is, who and how do you publish the monthly results? Kind of keep it in the boardroom, or do you publish it out to the masses? You know, what's the idea? How do you communicate what's going on to the rank and file? How do you do that? Right? So that's, again, yet another question that I think is very valuable, because it says a lot about the culture. It says a lot about, we want everybody to know. Now, I had a client that came right back and said, oh yeah, we put it up there on the bulletin board right there in the cafeteria. I said, awesome. Who reads it? Well, we don't know.
Who explains it?
What's that?
Who explains it?
Exactly. Who explains it? Do they even know what they're looking at? You know, I could argue, I mean, I'm a green belt, so I know that just because I see a trend line going up doesn't mean that's necessarily, that could be expenses, right? That's not necessarily a good thing. So it's being able to explain to the rank and file, here's what goodness looks like, and here's how we're doing against that metric. So the key here is, by the way, any questions? Any questions on what we've covered? So what makes this work is that, like a puzzle, you finish the puzzle. You've gone out and you've got this battery of questions that you can ask either people that work for that company through informational interviews, or you know, just talking to people that you found in LinkedIn, or stuff that you found in the databases, or the research that the libraries have. Does everybody have a library card for the local community college? Yes, no? Who does? Oh, come on, guys and gals. It's free. COD, you just go get a library card. I live in DePage County. I have access to every database they have, from the comfort of my home, sitting in my comfy clothes. I mean, it's just a great resource where you don't have to go to the library or go to, I mean, just access Hoover's, D&B, Reference USA. I mean, all these are great. I still use them today as a business owner, right? So you really should have that resource that you can use. Yes?
Many local libraries, my local library has those, and I use those.
Okay.
So there's, and you're right, straight online. Just go in, all I have to do is type in my number off my card.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So if you don't have that, I would highly suggest doing that, because, you know, I mean, I know that there's value in getting out of the house and, you know, going to places and doing certain things, but the name of the game is to align these, you know, align these different sets of questions into a picture. You build the puzzle not to, you know, use up time putting 500 pieces together. It's the fact that you make the picture, you create the picture that you intended. And that's what this is to help you structure your search, structure your research, structure your interviewing planning, so that you know exactly what you want to go in and ask, because you've got these different puzzle pieces that you don't quite have based on research, but you want to zero in and ask. Because ultimately, it's not about whether they want you, it's about whether you want them as well. So, every layer links. It's really, you know, is it a aligned company, or are there gaps? And again, the gaps may be run and hide, or gaps may be, hey, there's opportunity. And then you can tell whether, you know, a lot of times you'll get topical answers, but what you really want to know is what's genuine. When my son asked the Hyatt Regency about what's it like to work here, he got the job, and his boss told him one of the most insightful questions I've heard out of a 20-year-old in probably 2 or 3 years. right? Because it got below the surface. By the way, it was one of these gauntlet interviews. I call them gauntlet interviews, where you interview with 6 people, 6, 7 people, and he threw that question out there. And of course, you can tell when one person says something that the other person disagrees with, the body language, and the BS meter goes off, right? And so you know that it's genuine or it's topical. What are your questions? Yes, sir.
You're suggesting, I believe, that, you want to go work for a company that kind of knows what they're doing, but sometimes the opportunities are companies that need more help than can be find.
Desperately need your help, absolutely.
Exactly, so I mean, that's an opportunity to me.
Exactly.
I've been to companies where, you've gone in there and you realize that they need, you make those changes over time.
Right.
I mean, going into the ideal, perfect company for what's perceived to be.
No such thing. I believe there's no such thing as a perfect company.
True.
But you're absolutely right. That's why you have to make that call. But if you settle for topical answers, you'll never really know. You won't make that. You won't make the right call for the right reason. So absolutely, to your point, the deeper you dig, the more you can start to formulate that. Hey, I can really help you here. My experience really comes into play. I mean, let me tell you how I solved this exact problem 2 years ago. I mean, and start telling stories. You got to get comfortable telling stories, because that's where the context, that's where they can start to understand, hey, this person can really help me beyond what it says on your resume or your LinkedIn profile. Other questions? All right, so how will you leverage, that's your call to action, how will you leverage this for your own success in 2015? With that, do we have a basket of business cards per chance?
Yeah.
All right, can you get that? Sure. Because I brought some books to give away. So I don't want to carry them back home. So if I can...
Anybody need to put one in? There you go, Jeff.
Yeah.
Oh, now we got
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. I should have said no.
Yeah, compliance. So the first 4 are the missing piece. I wrote. It's actually based around the model I just showed you. So you can kind of get a little bit deeper into and wow your next employer if you're still looking with how much you know about business alignment.
All right, we're going to have a guest here. Denise, you're a member, sir. Somebody.
John Tor.
All right. All right, well, yes, you're on. Don?
Denise.
All right, we're going to get a committee member here, Rod.
Robert Ben. Awesome.
All right, Robert. Thank you. Very good. Well, one more?
2 more, actually.
2 more. Okay. Comments?
Career summary. No, I'm sorry. Don?
That's it.
Joe?
Last one is my most recent book, and it's more or less just kind of leadership in general. So Robert Lynn.
It's by somebody else.
So it's been a pleasure. I will provide Jerry with a copy of the presentation. If you have any questions at a later time, feel free to invite me into LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to help anybody that just has some questions, to clarify some of the points made. With that, I'll see you in 6 years.